Do a majority of Americans actually support Roe v. Wade? That's what the media and the Democrats would have you believe.
60% or 70%, depending on the poll you look at, of the American people do not want Roe to be overturned.
66% say no, they don't support the Supreme Court overturning Roe. 34% say they do.
64 to 66% of Americans believe that the Supreme Court should uphold Roe v. Wade, right?
69% of people across this country want Roe versus Wade to maintain.
We don't want to dismember children.
So in this video, we're going to look at the facts, look at the polling, and find out what Americans actually believe and what they think they believe about Roe v. Wade. Because we'll find out that on its face, while Americans do say they support Roe v. Wade in a general sense, when you get into specifics, that support dies off fairly dramatically. Let me show you what I mean. First, we can look at this poll from CBS, which is only about a week old, so it's very relevant. What they found is that 64% of Americans say we should keep Roe v. Wade, and only 36% say we should overturn it. Gallup has been asking a very similar question for the past several decades, and they found that in 2018, 64% of Americans say we should keep Roe v. Wade, with only 28% saying we should overturn it. So this right here is where the media stops. Americans say they're in favor of Roe v. Wade, that's all they need to know, and we should keep it because Americans want it. The problem is, Americans don't actually understand Roe v. Wade, and the next few polls show that pretty explicitly. This first poll is a little bit old, granted, it's from 2007, but I still think it's relevant today. In the first question, they ask if Roe v. Wade should be overturned. What you find is that only 34% of Americans want to overturn Roe v. Wade, and 55% say they don't. Now, while these numbers do differ from the ones we just looked at, they're still, in the same ballpark. Most Americans support Roe v. Wade. Now, after the initial question, the second one, they delve a little bit deeper and talk about the edge cases, where the life or health of the mother is in danger, or it's an example of rape, things like that. And as you'd imagine, there's a lot of support for these types of abortions. For question 3, they then talk about elective abortions more generally. If the woman doesn't like the gender of the fetus, she just doesn't want to have a kid, she's not married, things like that. And then in question 4, they come back to Roe v. Wade, but now with more information. This is what they say. Roe v. Wade prohibits states from restricting abortion during the first 6 months of pregnancy for any reason, including those we just discussed. If Roe v. Wade were overturned, states could make their own abortion policies that would permit abortions for some reasons and bar it for others. Knowing that, would you like the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade or not? With this additional context, those who support overturning Roe v. Wade increases by 9%. And those who want to keep Roe v. Wade decreases by 7%. So what you can see here is that when additional information about what Roe v. Wade specifically says is given, Americans' opinions on Roe v. Wade itself changes. And that's not surprising. Now, I do want to push back just a little bit on the wording in this problem, because it says that Roe v. Wade prohibits restrictions during the first 6 months of pregnancy. That's more or less true. Roe v. Wade does prohibit banning abortion throughout the majority of the first and second trimester. It does allow for minimal restrictions throughout some of the second trimester, but nothing very dramatic. So I think this question is mostly correct, but I think it's perhaps a little bit hyperbolic. Roe v. Wade does say that around the point of viability, that's when states can now begin banning abortion, which is somewhere between 20, 24 weeks, depending on how you look at it. And the number has changed as technology gets even better, which is kind of another reason why that doesn't make a ton of sense as a cutting off point, but that's just what it is. So here we have one poll that, yes, I understand is a bit on the old side, but additional polls that are much more recent basically tell us the same thing. Here we have a Gallup poll. It's actually on 538, but that's just because the graphic looks nicer. If we focus on the bottom pie graph, what we see is that 69% of Americans support Roe v. Wade. This is from a 2018 poll, and it's very similar to the numbers we're seeing today. If we look at those who support legal abortion in the first trimester, we apparently have only 60% support. I do want to point out that there are apparently 9% of Americans more in support of Roe v. Wade than there are those in support of legal abortion during the first trimester, which doesn't make a ton of sense because Roe v. Wade specifically says during the first trimester there could be no limitations and no restrictions whatsoever. So this kind of shows that at least a little bit of Americans don't know what they're talking about. But that becomes much clearer when you look at what happens during the second trimester. Here what we find is that only 28% of Americans support legal abortion with minimal or no restrictions throughout the second trimester. 28% of Americans. Just to reiterate why this makes no sense, Roe v. Wade says that you must allow abortions through the majority of the second trimester. And I think it's fairly clear to see what's actually happening here. When you ask Americans generally if they support Roe v. Wade, they tend to say yes, because they think it's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be in favor of abortion rights or reproductive rights, if you want to use the euphemism. So yes, they support Roe v. Wade. But when you omit the Roe v. Wade header and you say, do you support abortion in these very specific cases, especially when we get to the second trimester, Americans recognize that it starts to get a little bit iffy, that you can't just say, yes, I support it, even though they're contradicting themselves. Because again, you can't on the one hand say, I support Roe v. Wade, but then turn around and say, I don't actually support second trimester abortions, because that's included in Roe v. Wade. This is what I mean by saying Americans simply don't understand what Roe v. Wade actually says. So when the media claims that Americans by and large support Roe v. Wade, they only do so in the most general sense. When you ask about specific parts of Roe v. Wade, that support drops down dramatically to a third or less than 1/3 of the American public. So we're kind of departing a little bit from the key point of the video, but I also want to talk about American support for abortion at every trimester level. Because again, I think it's important and it shows how quickly things drop off. And it gives me hope as someone who is pro-life that Americans, actually understand more about abortion and restrictions on abortion than the Democratic platform would have you believe. There's a lot of numbers here, but if we just look at the three highlighted columns, the first one is those who support abortion or say it should be legal in the first trimester, where you have 60% in favor, 34% against. That's not really a surprise there. But when you go down to the second trimester, it completely swaps. Only 28% are in favor of legal abortions throughout the second trimester and 65% against. And understandably, in the third trimester, it drops down even more. Only 13% of Americans support it, where 81% are against it. Now, this specific Gallup poll has that number as 13%. I've seen it as high as 20%. But either way, I'm a little bit disappointed it's quite that high. But I do want to point out how radical that position is. The media, and again, the Democrats would have you believe that those who want to restrict abortion in the first trimester, those are the most extreme Americans, that they are the smallest percentage. And that's simply not true, because that encompasses 34% of Americans who say it should be illegal to obtain an abortion in the first trimester, compared to those who say it should be legal in the third trimester as only 13%. So who exactly is more extreme? Those who want abortion on demand without restriction for the entirety of the pregnancy, or those who want to say, you know what, let's not allow abortions because it is a human life, scientifically speaking. Here's another brief poll that I think can restore a little bit of your faith in humanity, because it did for me. This is again from a Gallup poll, but PolitiFact presents it in a really nice way. So they're asking how many people think that abortion should be legal in these cases for the first trimester, which is in dark blue, and the third trimester in light blue. They start off again with the edge cases that almost everyone agrees on, that if the woman's life is in danger, or it's the case of rape or incest, there's widespread support for both of those, more or less. But as you start getting down into the more nuanced examples, the ones that feel a little bit worse to support abortion, the support drops down pretty quickly. For example, if we start talking about abortion solely for the child having Down syndrome, the percentage of those who support that, even in the first trimester, drops down to 50%. Or if you say it's just an elective abortion, the woman doesn't need to give any reason, in the first trimester, that's only 45%. So what this poll tells us is that Americans, by and large, recognize that abortion is not the moral good that the pro-abortion crowd would have you believe. That as you get down to the actual real-world examples, that the majority of abortions are simply because the woman doesn't want to have a child, those are the regions where abortion support drops down really, really quickly. I kind of got on a tangent here. To kind of bring it all back together, my point simply is that you cannot use one broad brush to talk about the abortion support in America, right? You can try and claim that Americans, by and large, say they support Roe v. Wade, but they only say that because apparently they don't understand what it actually means. When you look at specific cases of abortion, you see that actually support for abortion is a heck of a lot less than a lot of people claim it is. Which is why when Democrats tried to pass their extraordinarily radical federal codifying of Roe v. Wade that didn't actually just codify Roe v. Wade, it also expanded abortion throughout the entire pregnancy, basically without restrictions, that's why it didn't pass, because people don't want that. Democrats may think they do, but these polls very clearly show that they don't. But I guess that's just another tangent. Anyway, if you have any questions or you want to learn more about any of this stuff, the sources are all down in the description below. So check them out, and hopefully you can use some of this information against your pro-abortion friends and family to show them that Roe v. Wade is not as popular as they think it is. Because let's be honest, Roe v. Wade was bad law. It has been bad law for 50 years, and it's about time that the Supreme Court finally recognized it. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.